Good evening from the National Weather Service office in Lake Charles. I'm meteorologist Donald Jones. I'm sorry for the little bit earlier briefing this evening than we had initially planned. We were initially scheduled for 7 p.m. That's why it says 7 p.m. behind me, so just ignore that. But we did have the National Hurricane Center has begun advisories on what is now being designated Potential Tropical Cyclone 6 in the southern Gulf of Mexico. And we are expecting this to become a tropical storm sometime in the next 24 hours. Now, a potential tropical cyclone it's not a real necessarily tropical cyclone. It's a product that's issued by the National Hurricane Center when a storm is expected to develop into a tropical cyclone, such as a tropical storm or a hurricane, and landfall is expected within about 2 days or so. It's designed to give people more of a heads up for a system that hasn't necessarily formed yet. So even though this potential tropical cyclone actually does have tropical storm force winds are already around 50 miles per hour, it still does not have a closed center of circulation. So it's not a defined tropical system by definition yet. You still have to have an actual closed circulation. And this is more of an elongated area of low pressure, or a trough, as we refer to it in the weather business, very similar to what you would see with a cold front, except that this is beginning to gain that circulation. We expect it will have a closed circulation sometime in the next 24 hours. At that point, it will become a tropical storm. So from that point, it is still forecast to move north with potential impacts expected across our region. So I wanted to go ahead and get on here real quick and give you an update as to what's going on. And we will obviously continue to provide updates over the next several days all the way through landfall with this as well. But I wanted to go ahead and jump into this here. That's why I was a couple of minutes late, because I was trying to throw this together real quick. So let's go ahead and jump into our briefing and get the latest. As always, if you have any questions as we go through our briefing, feel free to post them in our comments, and we'll answer them just as soon as we wrap up our briefing here. So let's go ahead and jump into it here, if I can. Clicker's not going to work, of course. Always something. That's okay. We'll do it this way. We do still have, as I said, that tropical disturbance in the southern Gulf of Mexico. It is forecast to become a tropical storm. It already has tropical storm force winds of around 50 miles per hour. So we're just waiting on that low-level circulation for it to actually reach tropical storm strength. The storm is expected to continue to drift north relatively slowly over the next few days, with landfall somewhere across the northern Gulf Coast. It looks like sometime on Wednesday, and probably closer more like Wednesday evening. Based on the current forecast track, which I'm going to show you here in just a second, we are expecting tropical storm force conditions across parts of our area. Hurricane force conditions are not out of the realm of possibility. In fact, this storm is forecast to be a Category 1 hurricane at landfall somewhere along the either upper Texas or Louisiana coastline sometime on Wednesday. So hurricane force winds across a fairly small area, not out of the realm of possibility with this system. Let's start by taking a look at the visible satellite imagery here this evening. You can see that the area of cloudiness and thunderstorms, the low level of circulation is going to form somewhere up in this area here, but it hasn't actually developed yet. You see how spread out the storm is, pretty much across the entire Gulf of Mexico, with storms ranging all the way from southern Mexico up to just off the Louisiana coastline. And that's what we're talking about, saying this is a very elongated area of low pressure. It doesn't have a well-defined center of circulation right now. And because of that, the track forecast is still fairly uncertain, because depending on exactly where that area of or the low-level center of circulation actually develops is going to have a large impact on where the storm eventually actually tracks. So the Hurricane Center has admitted that this is a little bit lower forecast confidence track than it might otherwise normally be. Having said that, here is the new advisory issued by the National Hurricane Center. I'm going to go ahead and make this full screen so you can take a look at it here. Again, maximum sustained winds, even though this is still just a potential tropical cyclone, are around 50 miles per hour already, because we're seeing those strong gusty winds in some of those rain bands. Even as far out as just off the Louisiana coastline, there were some gale warnings up for portions of the outer coastal waters to account for those. Now, we're expecting the storm to continue to drift very slowly. You can see it's only moving to the northwest at around 5 miles per hour, and that's going to continue for the next couple of days. You can see the little dots there very close together. Not a whole lot of movement with the storm. It's going to drift kind of slowly to the north, perhaps northwest, over the next 2 days or so, before eventually picking up forward speed as it approaches the either upper Texas or Louisiana coastline. What's going to happen is it's going to get caught up in that cold front that came through the area yesterday, and that's going to help push it off to the northeast. So this is a system that's probably going to be accelerating as it approaches the coastline and moves inland. So it's not going to be a storm that's going to stall over the area for days and days and days. Now, having said that, being as we just saw how large the circulation or the attempted circulation is over the Gulf of Mexico, we could be looking at those outer rain bands beginning as early as Tuesday morning and continuing all the way through Thursday. So even though it's going to be a fairly rapidly moving storm, once it actually picks up speed, we still might be dealing with the impacts of it for a couple of days. Now, again, the official forecast track is for the storm to intensify into a low-end Category 1 hurricane with maximum sustained winds near 75 miles per hour at landfall. The official landfall point right now is right around Sabine Pass, right along the Louisiana-Texas border. Now, the Hurricane Center has indicated, and a lot of computer models have been kind of moving somewhat to the east, to the right, of this forecast track this afternoon and this evening. If that trend continues, this forecast track would probably shift a little bit more to the right. So as we talked about a second ago, the Hurricane Center is saying that this is a fairly low confidence forecast because, again, we're talking about a storm that the center of circulation hasn't actually formed in yet. So it's difficult to pinpoint exactly where to tell the computer models, okay, this is the center of the point, where's it going to go from there? We have to actually have that center of circulation develop. So bear in mind that this forecast track could change somewhat significantly over the next 24 to 36 hours or so. It's very important that you continue to remain up to date on the progress of this storm. If you're anywhere along the Texas, Louisiana, even Mississippi, Alabama, Gulf Coast, as those the forecast track is subject to being changed here over the next couple of days or so, as this storm actually gets better organized and actually develops a center of circulation. Now, this is all of the graphics that I'm about to show you here are based on the current forecast track. So if that forecast track were to shift one way or the other, or the storm was to be weaker or more intense than is presently being forecast, these graphics are going to change. But I want to kind of give you an idea, at least initially, of what we're anticipating. These are the probabilities of seeing tropical storm force winds in an area. So for coastal parts of southwest Louisiana, south central Louisiana, we're looking at a 30 to 40% chance right now of seeing at least tropical storm force winds of 40 miles per hour or greater. And that pretty much extends up as far north as right around Lake Charles or thereabouts. Same thing going back across the southeast Texas coastline. We're looking at anywhere between about a 20 to 30% chance up to as far as the Beaumont-Port Arthur area, and then a slightly lower chance going further inland, about a 10 to 20% chance as you get up towards parts of Hardin and Tyler County. Again, these probabilities are subject to change, and if that sounds like it's very low, that's because, again, we're still looking at about 48-ish hours away. So these probabilities will come up as the storm gets better organized and as it approaches the coastline. So these are actually fairly high probabilities for a storm that's still 2 or 3 days away. Taking a look at the probabilities for hurricane force winds. Right now, again, the forecast is for the storm to become at least a Category 1 hurricane prior to landfall, but that is still very uncertain at this point. So the probabilities of seeing hurricane force winds are less than 5% across all of southeast Texas, southwest Louisiana, pretty much everywhere. You can see the one little area in green there that's still out over the Gulf of Mexico. That's a 5 to 10% chance of seeing those hurricane force winds, but the probabilities across any land area are less than 5%, at least at this time. Now, if we're going to see tropical storm force winds, when are they going to start? The most likely time that we're going to see tropical storm force winds begin are going to be Wednesday morning. We're looking at between about 8 a.m. and noon Wednesday morning for the onset of those tropical storm force winds. So as we go through this event, if you're making preparations, if evacuation orders become necessary, this is kind of the drop time. This is when you want to have all of those preparations complete And if you're going to evacuate, I'm not saying that you should. There have been no evacuation orders issued as of yet. But if that becomes necessary, Wednesday morning is going to be your deadline to get all of that done. Because we're going to be looking at those tropical storm force winds beginning to move inland at that time. Again, this is subject to change should the forecast track or intensity change. But we're looking at between about 8 a.m. and noon Wednesday morning for the onset of tropical storm force winds. That's anywhere across southeast Texas and southwest Louisiana. If this track were to shift a little bit further east, say into southeast Louisiana, you'd probably be looking at more of a noon to early afternoon time frame for the onset of those tropical storm force winds, if you're going to see them between about noon and say 4 p.m. or thereabouts. Now, this is what we call the earliest reasonable time of arrival. So this is kind of the earliest you could possibly expect tropical storm force winds, and that's going to be a little bit earlier. So we're looking at between about 8 p.m. and midnight Tuesday evening for the earliest possible onset of those tropical storm force winds. Again, that is subject to change should the forecast track or intensity change. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what's steering this storm, and that part is actually fairly straightforward for a tropical system. Let me grab my little pen here so I can write on this. So essentially what we're looking at here is, find a nice bright color here. So here's the potential tropical storm, which at this point will probably be a tropical storm. We'll call it TS right there. We have that lingering cold front that's still sitting across the coastal waters, across southern Louisiana back into upper Texas. This has been sitting here, even though it's kind of moved offshore, it's still sitting there. The winds are moving fairly strong to the east, to the northeast with that. Then we've got this area of high pressure over the eastern Gulf. This essentially extends out to roughly about there. So what's going to happen here is these winds are going to be moving clockwise around this area of high pressure, like that. That's what's going to drive the storm essentially northwest and then eventually to the north. Then it's going to get caught up in this cold front, and it's going to take off to the northeast, just like that. That's why it's going to begin to accelerate and move off as those steering currents associated with the cold front actually pick it up and carry it off to the northeast. So that's kind of what's driving the storm, and that's the rationale behind the forecast track at this point. I don't expect this to change a whole lot. The biggest area of uncertainty right now is exactly where that center of circulation is going to develop, because that'll have an impact on how far west or east along the northern Gulf Coast the storm eventually winds up getting. Okay. All right, so as far as conditions for development, sea surface temperatures across the Gulf of Mexico remain very warm. I showed this graphic last night. We're still looking at sea surface temperatures between about 86 and 88 degrees. Those are certainly plenty favorable enough for tropical development. You need about 80 degrees Fahrenheit to support a tropical storm, and we're well above that at this point and will remain so probably for the next few weeks at least. The other thing we look at when we're talking about storms developing and how quickly they're going to develop is the potential for wind shear. And you can see the bright reds and yellows there across the northern Gulf. That's areas of fairly strong wind shear that you're seeing, and that is actually related to the cold front that's sitting off the coast there. But you can see as you look further down into the southern Gulf of Mexico, the western Gulf of Mexico, those greens and blues, those are areas of fairly low wind shear. And so we're looking at fairly favorable conditions down that way for the storm to continue to intensify here over the next couple of days. And it's going to stay in that favorable environment because, again, it's not moving very fast at this point. It's only moving about 5 miles an hour or thereabouts. So there is going to be some time to intensify. Now, as it gets picked up by that cold front, I think that might start to impact it negatively. We'll see how that winds up developing if that wind shear is still in place at that time. But at least for the next couple of days, conditions are going to be pretty favorable for the development and intensification of this storm. All right, now let's start talking a little bit about expected impacts across the region. So we can, we'll be going back and forth a little bit about exactly where this landfall is going to take place, and exactly where it does is going to have a large impact on some of the impacts that we're going to see, but rainfall is going to be pretty widespread regardless of exactly where the center of circulation makes landfall. So you can see this is the excessive rainfall outlook for Tuesday. This is a product issued by the Weather Prediction Center. The slight risk area there, let me, if I can move me out of the way here, you can see the areas in yellow. So that's all of South Louisiana essentially, and most portions of coastal parts of Southeast Texas. That is a slight risk. So about a 15% chance of seeing flash flooding anywhere within this location, or within 25 miles of any location in the areas highlighted in yellow. So New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Lake Charles, Lafayette, New Iberia, back towards Beaumont, even back towards Houston, all in that slight risk area. So a 15% chance of seeing flash flooding from some of these bands with that storm as it begins to approach on Tuesday. Now, as we head into Wednesday, that risk area expands even further into parts of central and even northern Louisiana, into parts of southern Mississippi. We're looking at still about a 15% chance of seeing flash flooding on Wednesday associated with this. And as the storm gets its act together even more, I expect these probabilities will intensify even further. This is a look at our forecast rainfall totals right now. You can see along the coastal portions of southeast Texas and especially southwest and south central Louisiana, the areas highlighted in orange there, that is a 6 to 8 inch range that we're anticipating. A lot of areas in that region to see 6 to 8 inches or more of rainfall along the coastline with this storm. The areas highlighted in yellow, that goes a little bit further to the north, say north of Lake Charles, up towards Alexandria, Baton Rouge, New Orleans. All of those areas are in that yellow. That's a 4 to 6 inch range that we're expecting, between about 4 and 6 inches of rainfall with this storm. Again, these are all subject to change should the forecast track change significantly. But I think even with those outer rain bands, we're going to be seeing some significant rainfall with this system. So this is probably a fairly good first estimate on what we would expect to see in terms of rainfall totals. Another thing I want to kind of show you here, these are the probabilities of seeing significant rainfall across the region. I realize this is not a very good map, but it kind of gives you at least a general idea. You kind of make out the Texas-Louisiana state line there. You see Houston is labeled, DeRidder is labeled, Baton Rouge is labeled, so you can kind of sort of pick out exactly where you are. But the bottom line here is that we're looking at between about a 60 and 80% chance of seeing more than 2 inches of rainfall with this system. We're looking at about a 30 to 60% chance of seeing more than 4 inches of rainfall with this system across southeast Texas and southwest Louisiana. And we're looking at between about a 20 and 40% chance of seeing more than 6 inches of rainfall. Of course, the highest risk areas are going to be across coastal portions of southeast Texas and southwest Louisiana. Now, there will be storm surge with this system. Even if we're talking about a low-end tropical storm, 40, 50-mile-an-hour winds are enough to cause storm surge across the region. I wanted to show two graphics here, but I didn't have time to put them all together. I'll have them for the next briefing. But this is going to be our worst-case scenario. Not everybody is going to see the storm surge that I'm depicting here, but this would be our worst-case scenario for possible storm surge across the region. I've got zoomed in here. This is the Lake Charles area and goes essentially over west to Orange. You can see the significant coastal flooding across parts of Cameron Parish. That should come as a surprise to absolutely nobody. And you can kind of see the extent of the storm surge up the Calcasieu and the Sabine with our worst case scenario with this system for a Category 1 hurricane, essentially moving right up the Sabine River or thereabouts. We're looking at anywhere between 3 to 5 foot of surge moving up the Calcasieu River with this. Pay no attention to the text on the left-hand side there. I didn't get to look at it. But the primary thing I want you to focus on here is the graphic. I put these together in a hurry, so I apologize for that. Moving a little bit further to the east, this is over towards Vermilion Parish, Lafayette, down towards Morgan City. Again, this is our worst-case scenario for storm surge with this system. Right along the immediate coastline, you can see the 7 to 9 foot potential storm surge across coastal portions of Vermilion Parish. And then coastal portions of St. Martin, St. Mary, down outside of the levee systems, down that way towards Morgan City, and then back across southeast Texas. Again, our worst case storm surge scenario has roughly about 3 to 5 feet moving up the Sabine there, and that would impact eastern portions of the Port Arthur area with some storm surge getting into the Beaumont area as well. Now, again, I'm going to get another graphic here for our next briefing that's going to have our most likely storm surge to go along with our worst case scenarios. So again, this is not necessarily what is being forecast. This is our absolute worst case scenario. So chances are any storm surge that we see is going to be better than what is being depicted here. Finally, taking a quick look at our forecast as we go through the rest of the week. Obviously, it's going to be wet. That's the bottom line here as we go through at least the middle and latter part of the week. The potential landfall on Wednesday. We'll still be looking at rain from rain bands on the backside as we go into Thursday, and then hopefully we'll be done with all of this by Friday. Because again, the storm is going to be accelerating off to the northeast as it makes landfall, regardless of exactly where it makes landfall. So we will be seeing it move inland fairly rapidly thereafter. So that's what we have here this evening from the National Weather Service. Again, I know I kind of threw this together in a bit of a hurry, so I'm missing some of the stuff that I would usually talk about here, but I'm going to try to get another briefing together, and we'll try to do another one later on tonight. So I'll have details about that here later on this evening with that. And of course, we are going to continue to provide regular updates with each successive advisory all the way up to and through landfall. The next official advisory comes out from the National Hurricane Center at 10 p.m. this evening. So we will have another Facebook Live briefing for you for that at that time. So plan to do another one here, let's say 10:30 this evening. We're going to put a number on it, and then if we have to do another one earlier than that, I'll put social media posts out there to let everyone know. So again, we do have, if we do have any questions, feel free to post them in our comment section. I know we've got a lot of people watching right now. Looks like we've got about 2,200 people watching at the moment. So I realized this probably caught a few people off guard. It kind of caught me off guard. I came in yesterday. I'm like, what is that? And now we're talking about a potential tropical cyclone. It's that time of year. We're actually officially 2 days away from the climatological peak of hurricane season. So we're kind of right on schedule as far as one that we're going to be looking at, a tropical system. Let's see. Sadie asks, are we looking at this to be a significant hurricane? Right now, the official forecast is for it to be a minimal Category 1 hurricane. So maximum sustained winds at landfall are expected to be right around 75 miles per hour. Now, that is certainly enough to cause some power outages. It's certainly enough to cause some storm surge. It's not going to cause the devastation, at least based on the current track, that's on the order of a Hurricane Laura or something like that. That was a Category 4 storm with much stronger winds. But 75 miles per hour is certainly strong enough to do some damage, and it is certainly strong enough to cause some power outages. Okay, just running through some of the comments here to see if we do have any questions. Enjoy this moment of dead air so you don't have to listen to me talking. Sometimes I get tired of listening to myself talking on here. Anyansi asks, I see in another place the hurricane will be a Category 3. Is that true? That's very unlikely, at least at this point. I wouldn't say that it's 100% impossible, because I never say never with these storms. We've seen them do some crazy stuff before. But I think even a Category 1 hurricane is probably going to be on the upper end of the reasonable forecast situation right now. So I think a Category 1 hurricane is certainly possible. A Category 3 is pretty out there. That's going to be an outlier situation. So no, I don't think that's likely at this point. Stephen asks, what are the chances of it going further east than Lake Charles? Pretty good, actually. Most of the recent computer models have actually come in a little bit further to the east than this official forecast track. And the Hurricane Center has said that if that trend continues, this track will probably have to be shifted a little bit further to the east. So do expect that there's going to be some changes in this forecast track. Even as soon as late tonight, we could have a shift in this forecast track. And if it's going to shift, it's most likely going to shift to the east or to the right. Roger says the anticipated wind speeds in Lake Charles at landfall. Based on the current forecast track, we're going to be looking at tropical storm force winds. So just off the top of my head, you'd probably be looking at 50 to 60 mile an hour winds, or at least wind gusts. Taylor says we're in Creole and asks about evacuation. First off, I don't make evacuation decisions. That's your local emergency managers and your local elected officials. They make evacuation orders. As far as I know, there have been no evacuation orders issued. The emergency managers and that community that I just mentioned have just been briefed. They've been given very similar briefing to what I've just given you here. They were briefed just within the last half hour or so. So they'll be making those decisions and putting those plans in place as we go through the evening. But as of right now, I'm not aware of any evacuation orders that have been put into place at this time. Brooklyn asks, will it hit Alexandria as a hurricane? No, we're not expecting it to still be a hurricane as far north as Alexandria. In order for that to be the case, it would have to be a much, much stronger storm than what we're forecasting here. So no, we're not expecting hurricane force winds in Alexandria right now. Patty says, I know it's early, but what is the biggest concern for this storm? Stalling, excessive rain, or tornadoes? Well, we're not expecting it to stall. We are expecting significant rain. And yes, I think that is going to be your number one concern with this system, is going to be the potential for flooding from heavy rainfall. Tornadoes will also be a possibility, but I think flooding is going to be the biggest overall threat. So yeah, we will have flooding from heavy rainfall. There likely will be a few tornadoes, and there will be some storm surge. But I think flooding is going to be by far the biggest issue with this storm. Brian asks, when will you post a parish by parish impact slide? That'll probably come tomorrow sometime, maybe late tomorrow. I usually try to do that about a day-ish before the storm actually makes landfall, once we have a good idea of where it's going to go. We'll have to see exactly how this develops. Once we have a pretty good idea of where it's going to go and what the strength is going to be, then we'll do that parish by parish impact graphics. Audrey asks, can this storm become stronger than a Category 1, or do y'all not expect it to? At this point, we don't expect it. We're expecting a Category 1 to be kind of the strongest that we're expecting it to be at this point. Does that mean it can't overachieve and do better? No, of course not. We could potentially have a Category 2. That's not out of the realm of possibility. But right now, the official forecast is for a low-end Category 1 hurricane with maximum winds of 75 miles per hour. There's a fairly decent chance it doesn't even make hurricane strength. We could be looking at just a mid-range or strong tropical storm at landfall as well. But right now, Category 1 hurricane is what we're forecasting. Yes, that could be. We could be looking at something a little stronger, but we're not expecting that at this time. Ian Don Guy asked, will it close schools in Houston? Again, I have no control over that at all. But based on the current forecast track, I would not expect schools to close in Houston. Jade asked, what are we looking at in New Iberia? Again, this is based on the current forecast track, which could shift. And if this shifts further to the east, your impacts would be more significant. But essentially, we're going to be looking at the potential for tropical storm force winds. The biggest issue is going to be the potential for heavy rainfall. Let me go ahead and make this full screen for you. So for the New Iberia area, we're looking at, and pretty much all of coastal South Louisiana or Southwest Louisiana and South Central, we're looking at between about 6 and 8 inches of rainfall expected. That's going to be your biggest overall threat right now. And then we will be looking at the possibility of perhaps a few tornadoes with some of those bands as it approaches. All right, just trying to run through. There's a whole lot of comments right now. I'm trying to run through them as fast as I can. Sandra says, 2 days away. If an evac is called, where to go? Based on the current forecast track and the fact that we're kind of leaning a little bit to the right of that, my advice right now would be probably west. If you move west over towards the Houston area or west of Houston, if you had to evacuate, that would probably be the way to go. You could also go north. You know, our longtime motto in this office has always been, we run from the water, we hide from the wind. So the storm surge is the biggest threat to life and property. To a lesser extent, the flooding rainfall as well. So if you go a little bit further north, you get away from the storm surge, you can potentially get away from the highest overall flooding, then you're in a significantly safer place than you might already be. So at least for right now, my advice would be either go west towards Houston or north towards Shreveport. But again, as of right now, there have been no evacuation orders issued for any areas. Here a little bit. Lorelei asked, could this have the potential to make a Category 2 storm? It's not out of the realm of possibility. Again, the official forecast, though, is for a Category 1. Dorothy asks, is an evacuation necessary for a Category 1? That depends on where you live and what kind of structure, you're living in. If you live right along the Cameron coast, then yes, an evacuation order or an evacuation is probably recommended. If you live anywhere further inland, generally probably not so much. But again, you need to, your emergency managers they have lots and lots of detail about different storms, how they approach, what kind of impacts are usually seen in that, and they issue evacuation orders based on that. So those are the warnings and the evacuation orders that you heed. If you find yourself under an evacuation order, then that's when you need to evacuate. That's pretty much what it boils down to. Patty asked, do we know how long to expect 75-mile-per-hour winds to be sustained? If this forecast track verifies, not long at all. If we're talking about a minimal Category 1 hurricane at landfall, a 75-mile-an-hour hurricane, it'll be weakening rapidly as it moves inland, so maybe just a couple of hours at most. Now, if it were much stronger, then you'd be looking at a much longer period of time for hurricane force winds. Shauna asks, why the discrepancy between the GFS and the NHC track? Because the National Hurricane Center, like all of us, as meteorologists, we do not rely on any single model or any single model run to make a forecast. Our forecast is a culmination of many different computer models. So the GFS is just one run of one computer model, and the Hurricane Center's forecast is a conglomeration of many computer models and their own expertise. So very rarely will the two line up perfectly. Haley asks, when will Calcasieu School Board be meeting with you guys to make a decision on school closures? Again, they've been briefed already. They were briefed. Actually, they may be still getting briefed right now. If not, they were just briefed. So they have all the information that we have and all the information that I just gave you. As far as when they'll make decisions, that's on their own time. We have no control over that. Belinda asks, what about the tornado threat? There is potentially going to be a tornado threat. Regardless of where the storm actually winds up making landfall. If the storm intensifies into a strong tropical storm or a low-end hurricane, there will be a tornado threat as the storm makes landfall and move inland. Now, historically and generally, we usually see those tornado threats on the right-hand side or the east side of a storm. So anywhere along and east of wherever that center makes landfall, that's where we're most likely to see tornadoes. Donna asks, is there any chance of warnings going out, like tropical storm or hurricane warnings? Yeah, those will likely go out as the storm gets within the time frame for them. We need to be within 48 hours for a watch. I think it's 36 hours for a warning, if I'm not mistaken. So once we get within those time frames, then the appropriate watches and warnings will go out. Georgette's asking, what are my thoughts about the possibility of this going further east towards New Orleans? I don't know about as far east as New Orleans, but there are several computer models that are shifting the track further to the east, so it would not surprise me if that trend continues through the evening. It wouldn't surprise me to see this forecast track shift somewhat to the east. Will it shift as far east as New Orleans? I don't think so, at least not yet. But we could see a shift to the east later on tonight or tomorrow. Karen says, when will they let us know if we need to evacuate? Probably sometime within the next day or so. It wouldn't surprise me to see those come out either tomorrow or possibly Tuesday. I'd say Tuesday at the latest. So late tomorrow or Tuesday most likely. Wayne asks, how would this storm be in comparison to Hurricane Delta? Hurricane Delta was a Category 2 storm. I think it was an upper level Category 2 storm, but still a Category 2 storm nonetheless. So it would probably be somewhat comparable, perhaps a little weaker than that. And again, we're talking about a Category 1 storm, but I would say probably less destructive than Delta, at least based strictly on paper. But again, I don't like comparing storms to one another because they have different circulation sizes. They have different makeups. They're in different storm environments, steering environments. So you can't necessarily directly compare one storm to another or say that, okay, I was fine in this storm, so I'll be fine in that storm. It doesn't work that way. Different storms approaching from the coastline at different angles. You might have one that's approaching this way. You might have another one that's approaching this way. And the storm surge from that is going to be completely different because the physics of it is completely different. So I don't like comparing one storm to another. So let's try to avoid doing that as much as we can. Okay, I'm way behind on the comments here, so I'm going to scroll forward a little bit here. Jason asks, do the models include the Hurricane Hunter data yet? Yes, they do now. The Hurricane Hunter aircraft were out this morning. They took some data. All of that went into what we call the 18Z run. That's kind of the midday run of the computer models. So that data is now being brought into there and will continue to be brought into there all the way through the landfall of the storm. In addition to that, we are also releasing extra weather balloons at our office and at other offices around the Gulf Coast. So that's extra data that will also be put into those computer models to provide a more accurate picture of what the track is eventually going to be. Deanna asks, if we all blow really hard, can we move it to Florida? If only it was that easy. I'd go outside right now. But unfortunately, no, it just doesn't work that way. Janet asked, should refineries in Beaumont be preparing for a controlled shutdown? I'm not sure what the criteria are for refineries and their controlled shutdowns. I'm sure they're certainly keeping a very close eye on it. Some of them may be actually watching this briefing even now. But I can't really speak to that because I'm not sure what their criteria are. Joshua asks, is there a good chance for dry air to intercept the system? That's an interesting way of putting that. I've been watching YouTube videos on the outlooks. There's not a whole lot of dry air out there at the moment, at least not that I've seen. So no, I don't expect that to be a major issue with this system. Conditions are fairly favorable for development of this storm. Kemi says, can you talk about the potential storm surge near Intracoastal City? I don't want to get too in the weeds with that yet because, again, when we're talking about storm surge, we're talking about an impact that is going to be highly affected by the exact location of the landfall. So I can give you, here's a graphic here that kind of shows you can see Vermilion there. Intracoastal City is not specifically outlined. But again, this is our worst case scenario. This is not necessarily what is being forecast. This is what we would expect to see in a worst case scenario of a Category 1 hurricane moving essentially just to the west of Intracoastal City with maximum storm surge moving into kind of Vermilion Bay. And that's not necessarily what's being forecast at this time. So we're going to get more specific about storm surge here once we get a little bit better handle on exactly where we expect this storm to go. So I don't want to get too into the weeds with exact specifics on storm surge, but yes, there is going to be the potential for storm surge, obviously across the western and parts of Vermilion Bay, if we have any kind of a storm that's approaching from the west and we get those easterly or southeasterly winds pushing water into Vermilion Bay. Mike says, this seems weak for a September storm, is it? Well, I mean, all storms start off weak, don't they? You got to start somewhere. So the biggest limiting factor with the intensity as it relates to this storm is how much time it's going to be out over the Gulf of Mexico. You know, we're looking at roughly a little over 48 hours. You know, we're looking at a landfall likely sometime Wednesday afternoon into Wednesday evening as the most likely time of arrival. Or the most likely after those tropical storm force winds. So that's going to be the biggest limiting factor. If it had time to just sit out over the Gulf and spin for a few days, then it would likely ramp up a little more. Conditions aren't necessarily ideal either. They're favorable, but they're not ideal. We do still have some wind shear across the northern Gulf, so that's kind of somewhat of a limiting factor. So, you know, you can't really say that this is a weak or strong storm for a certain time of year. Yeah, Beryl was definitely the one earlier in July was an extreme outlier in the fact that it was the earliest Category 5 hurricane I think ever. But in general, you know, you can still get Category 1 tropical storms in September, and that's all they become. That's not necessarily uncommon. Lorna asked, when will the hurricane hunters go back out again? I didn't check their schedule, but I'd imagine they're probably, if they're not doing round the clock planes out there right now, they're probably pretty close to it at this point, and they will continue to ramp that up. To be honest, I don't have an answer for you straight up right now. I'll have to go check and see. But my guess is they'll probably be back out there this evening if they're not out there right now. Aaron asks, is there a chance for rapid intensification? Like we talked about a couple of minutes ago, the conditions aren't necessarily ideal. You usually need to have pretty close to ideal conditions for a rapid intensification situation. I'm not saying that it's completely out of the realm of possibility, but there are some limiting factors with that storm surge. I'm not storm surge, the wind shear in the northern Gulf that's kind of going to keep conditions slightly less than perfect for that rapid intensification. So while it's not impossible, I don't think it's particularly likely at this point. Mike says, I've seen on some models earlier the wind was higher on the western side than the eastern side. Is that still the case? I think the winds are actually highest on kind of the northern side right now. Now, I think you're right. I think there is a band on the western side that probably has some pretty strong winds. The reason for that is the storm actually doesn't have a defined center of circulation yet. It's still elongated. It's still essentially a trough of low pressure. So if you look at the satellite image, this is about an hour old now. But you can see essentially this is drawn out all the way across most of the Gulf of Mexico here. So this is probably the band or the area that would have those strong winds you were talking about. But you can see the center of circulation is probably going to develop somewhere up in here, but this extends all the way out here, just like this. Okay, so that's what we call a trough of low pressure at this point. Eventually, this is going to wrap into some kind of circulation somewhere up in there. Exactly where still kind of remains to be seen. But because it's so spread out and still elongated as a trough, you're not looking at a typical tropical system right now. So it's not unusual for winds to be stronger on the west side. Now, as that storm begins to wrap up and gets itself better organized, you'll probably start to see those stronger winds shift to the east side of the storm. Suge says, I thought Laura was a Cat 3 at landfall. Donald said it was a 4. No, it was a 4. It was actually a very strong 4. It was closer to a 5 than a 4. Some people would argue that it is a 5, even though it wasn't. It was a 4. It was a strong 4. Ian Donagai says, could the track shift west? Spaghetti models have been shifting west today, hinting at a possible landfall at Beaumont High Island. Actually, no, they've actually been shifting the opposite direction. We've been looking at the more recent model runs have been shifting further to the east, so I think that's probably more likely than a shift to the west. Dana asked, do you know how quickly it'll pass through? We're going to be looking at this storm. It's moving quite slow right now. Let me put this back full screen for you here. It's only moving to the northwest at about 5 miles per hour, but we are going to be looking at it picking up speed as it approaches either the upper Texas coast or the Louisiana coastline. You can see how those dots are all very close together as we go into the first one is tomorrow afternoon at 1 p.m., then 1 a.m., then Tuesday at 1 p.m. You see they're all very clustered, very close together. And then we start to see them kind of spread apart again. That's it. That's because it's going to be accelerating. It's going to be picking up speed as it approaches the coastline. So I can't tell you exactly, it's going to be moving at X miles per hour as it makes landfall, but it is going to be accelerating off to the northeast as it makes landfall. So rather than slowing down, it's actually going to be picking up speed as it approaches the coast. Kate asks, if I cook a gumbo tonight, will it still be good by landfall? If you have a refrigerator, yes. And in fact, it might be better at landfall than it is right now because gumbo that sits a while tends to get better. Okay, trying to catch up here. I'm about 15 minutes behind on the questions here. Turin asked, what are the water temps? The water temps right now are ranging between about 86 and 88 degrees. You wish they were 66. Where are my water temps? There. So we're looking at between about 86 and 88 degrees for water temperatures right now. Regina asks, if it does shift east, will our rain chances significantly decrease? It depends on exactly where you are. If this storm were to shift, significantly further east into, say, southeast Louisiana, then you see probably significantly less rain across southeast Texas. If we're just looking at a little bit of a shift, 30, 50 miles one way or the other, that's likely not going to have a huge impact on how much rain we're going to see. Chrissy asks, is there any chance of this storm stalling in the Gulf like Harvey? No, like we talked about a minute ago, and I'm sure you probably posted this before we talked about it, but the storm should be accelerating rather than slowing down. It's going to be picking up speed as it approaches the coast and moves inland. Okay, I'm sorry if I missed some of your questions. I'm trying to catch up a little bit here, so I'm having to skip a few. There's just too many of them at the moment. But I'm gonna try to answer as many of them as I can. I'm trying to get a few of them at once, or a few questions with one answer, because there's a lot of the same ones. Melissa asked, so there's no chance of it hitting Beaumont area? No, I'm not saying that at all. You see, the Beaumont area is still within the cone of uncertainty. I'm not saying that there's no chance that you're not going to see impacts. I'm saying that the chances of a shift further to the east are more likely than a shift further to the west. I'm not saying that there's no chance of it hitting Beaumont right now. Jason asks, what time frame do you think we'll see the center form so the models can be more accurate? We're looking at that probably within the next 12 to 24 hours. So probably either tomorrow morning or sometime during the day tomorrow. At least that's what we're expecting. Natalie asks, when will the next update be? We're going to do another update this evening following the next update by the Hurricane Center. That comes out at 10, so we'll do our next briefing at 10:30. We're going to do another briefing at 10:30 p.m. Brian asked, if it shifts to the east, could it shift back to the west? Yes, absolutely. That's why we have this, the cone of uncertainty. You see, the cone there extends essentially from, looks like it's all the way down to about Corpus Christi, all the way over to the Baton Rouge area. So there's still a very large area of uncertainty, and I expect shifts both west and east. Right now, I think it's more likely, if we're going to see a shift with the next forecast update, it's probably going to be to the east or to the right. But we could see it shift back to the west at some point. Yeah, absolutely. Melissa asked, will we see a shift in the cone by the update at 10:30 tonight? The next official update from the Hurricane Center comes out at 10 o'clock. We'll have a complete new advisory, and if the computer models continue to shift to the east, then the track will probably shift to the east. We'll see how that looks as we go through the evening. Bryce asked, what would dictate an east or west shift to the cone as of now? Spaghetti models and ensembles are a bit different. Yeah. But what we're looking for is more of a consensus. If there's a big split, then you're probably not going to see too much of a shift either way. The Hurricane Center likes to kind of split the difference when we're looking at two large splits. They're not too far different right now. But what we're looking for is a consensus. We're trying to look for clusters of different model runs and different ensemble runs that gives us confidence in the forecast. And then also the expertise of the Hurricane Center for this kind of environment and how storms have behaved in this kind of environment before. David asked, Donald, can I bring you a yellow shirt? You can bring me one. I'm not going to wear it, but you can bring it. Okay, just trying to catch up on some questions here. I think I'm getting closer. I do realize I'm skipping a lot of questions. I apologize for that, but there's so many of them. We'd be on here until the next briefing, just trying to answer these. So I'm trying to gather as many of them as I'm seeing them. I'm trying to cluster them together and try to answer several people at once. Chris asks, will the wind shear play a factor in keeping this storm from strengthening? Somewhat, yes. There is some wind shear across the northern Gulf. And it's not going to stop it entirely, but I think it's going to keep it a little bit more limited than it might otherwise be. Haley asks, which model do you tend to lean towards? Is there a specific one that's better? No, there's not. There's different models that do well in different situations. And every model has its own biases. Some have a tendency to spin every little wave that's out there into a gigantic hurricane. Others never develop a hurricane. Some have wet biases, some have dry biases, some have east biases, some have west biases. And that's why we never rely on a single model run to actually make a forecast. And I'm the same way. I don't ever look at one single model. I like to look at many, many different runs of as many models as I can. And you also need to have an understanding of what those model biases are. So no, there isn't one that I necessarily lean towards more than another. Holly asks, when are you expecting an eye of circulation to form? We're expecting a center of circulation to form probably sometime during the day tomorrow. We're looking at between probably about 12 and 24 hours. That'd be sometime between tomorrow morning and tomorrow evening. Michelle says, when I go to Disney World in January, I'm going to bring you a black shirt with a Donald Duck on it. What makes you think I don't already have one of those? I might. Keep watching. You might see it. It might make it in here. Mickey Mouse is back there somewhere, too. Elizabeth says, hey, Donald Jones. Hi, dude. All right, we've devolved into shirts now. I'm going to take it. We're just about done here then. All right, I think we are going to go ahead and wrap up here for the time being. I think I've answered a lot of the questions that I'm running through here. I'm seeing a lot of the same ones. So if you joined us late, you can actually rewind back to the beginning, the first 10 minutes or thereabout, or the actual briefing. This will also be available as a recording just as soon as we get off the live version of it here. So you're welcome to that. The first 10 minutes or so is when we actually talk about the briefing. We go through the slides. After that, it's mostly just questions and answers. But that'll give you that'll answer probably about 90-95% of the questions that you may still have. If you do have a question that I missed for some reason, feel free to send us a direct message on Facebook. I'll be happy to answer it that way. You can also give us a call or send me an email. My email and phone number is there on the screen there. It's donald.jones@noaa.gov. And our phone number here at the office is 337-477-5285. We're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have forecasters here all the time. We'll be happy to answer any questions you have. And then, of course, you can email me directly if you have any questions. Also, you can also message us on Facebook, message us on Twitter, message us on Instagram, and we'll be happy to answer you that way as well. So lots of ways to get in touch with us to get your questions answered if you still have burning ones. Again, our next briefing will be 10:30 p.m. this evening. We'll have a new update from the National Hurricane Center at that time with all the latest and greatest. I'll try to have a little bit more cohesive package for you in terms of graphics here. This one was kind of thrown together fairly quickly, but we'll try to have a better understanding of that later on this evening. So again, next briefing will be 10:30 p.m. this evening. We'll see you all then. In the meantime, everyone, have a wonderful rest of your afternoon and evening. Get out and enjoy this nice weather. It's the calm before the storm, per se. It's nice out there, though, so do step outside and enjoy it for a little while. Everyone have a wonderful rest of your evening. We'll talk to you again at 10:30. You say you're going to be back on 10:30? 10:30, yeah. He's going to be back on 10:30 then.
He said that, people ask if it gets hit more east and if it gets a good wind. Maybe no tonight or not so far, like if it's hit more east, that's like all.
The way it's saying it's pretty fluid right now, so it's really until these systems start to it's just like trash. So a lot of times, sometimes it just takes a day, and other times it might take a couple of days. So it's really just have to play by ear type of thing. Where